Well, welcome back to the Balagan Connection. My name is David Tal, and I'm going to be bringing truth from what's going on in Israel. Truth about what's going on in Gaza, truth about what's going on in Israel and around Israel, truth that you won't hear in other places, truth that the headlines won't bring you, and truth that I think is very critical in understanding where and how and what is going to happen in Israel in the near future. We're standing at a very pivotal moment right now. The IDF is about to go back into, and I'm saying back into because we've been there, into Gaza City. There's been what we call Tzav Shmone, or call-ups, special emergency call-ups that were issued to about 100,000 Israeli reservists. They're being mobilized and trained as we go in. The reservists will probably take on the other roles around Israel, on the borders in the north, on the borders in the south. And the regular army, the young kids, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds with officers that are 21, 22, 23 years old, are going to go back in and completely conquer Gaza City. While this is not happening, there's negotiations. It turns out that Hamas is willing to negotiate more under fire. And at the same time, the nations of the world are preparing to recognize a Palestinian state in return, or to reward the terror of the 7th of October. And they're feeling that Israel is not doing enough to finish this war. And behind all of this is a second war that's going on, a war of words. Accusations of genocide, ethnic cleansing, starvation, terrible blood libels are being brought up against Israel. The slander campaign is horrific. And we're seeing things that remind us of our past history. But the Bible gives us a very different standard. And the word that we're going to be talking about today is Tzedek, justice, true justice, God's justice, political justice, media justice, and that's our Hebrew term for today. So let's start this off, first thing first, with the oncoming military campaign that is probably going to start in the next week. Israel is going to go back into Gaza City because we understand, and we got a hunch that most of the remaining hostages are still being held in the tunnels underneath Gaza City, which has not been hit the way other places have been hit because of the hostages that have been in there. Israel is ready to go in full power, and the idea is that the ground forces, the armor, the special units are going to move in and go from block to block, clearing neighborhoods, securing strong points, and then going underground to see what's going on in the tunnel network. Piece by piece, block by block. The biggest challenge is going to be that tunnel network, over 300 miles long, functioning as command centers. They have weapon caches inside, escape routes, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, is going to fight a two-layered battle, if you want, above the ground, in the buildings and in the rubble above the ground, but also under the ground with specialized tunnel units, tunnel technologies, and things like that. The mission is clear, not simply to plant a flag, but completely dismantle Hamas as a military threat to Israel. Gaza cannot be left with Hamas being able, capable, and willing to pull off another 7th of October. And it is very, very critical that this ends with Hamas actually giving up and giving in. The most important thing, as we understand, are the hostages. There's still 20 hostages that we believe are still alive, and there's more hostages that we believe are casualties. And in this situation, Israel's going to have to work very, very carefully. The only thing is that we're going back in and we're calling up the reservists. Quick reminder, we all go into the military in Israel for 3 years. After we finish our 3 years of regular military service, we get put in a reserve unit. Reserve units usually get called up about 1 month a year, sometimes less, sometimes more. That's normal reserve duty in Israel. The only thing is that in times of war, in times of emergency, like the time that we're talking about right now, these reservists have been doing up to, some of them about 300, some of my guys have been doing 350 or 400 days in the last 2 years. That's more than a year and a bit. I mean, that's more than the vast majority of their time is in uniform. And the problem is that as opposed to the regular army, the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, or the people who are career military, what we call, reservists have a life. They have a family. They have a job. They have an education. And they're being called up again. This reflects the seriousness of the campaign. It's amazing that Israel's reservists are willing to do this. Think about 20% of the population, the male population, by the way, very interesting. Reservists are almost always men. 20% of the male population goes to war. And this is not just the army going to war. This is something on the level of World War II as far as the amount of men being mobilized from the population. Nearly every Israeli family has somebody that's in this. I have nephews that are going in. Some that have just finished their military service are still in their military service, and some that will be going in reserves. Every family is touched by this mobilization, and everyone has to decide how this works. Israel hasn't seen a call-up like this, or this kind of dedicated call-up, since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And this is a major issue. This is a challenge for our economy. This is a challenge for our social dynamic. This is a challenge for all the tensions that are between the different aspects. And like everything else, we're arguing about everything else. We're arguing, for instance, that some of the people in Israel are not serving as much. We're arguing, for instance, that some of the people in Israel think that this war should end. We shouldn't put more men into jeopardy, and so forth and so on. Civilian movement and military control. In order to deal with the calls of genocide and ethnic cleansing, Israel has decided that it's going on to Gaza, but we're actively moving the people in Gaza City out of the combat zone. There's still areas in Gaza that are not part of the combat zone, so we're moving them out of the combat zone, pushing them through humanitarian corridors. So one, we can get them out of the fire, and two, we can actually create shelters and give them humanitarian aid in this place. Israel is doing this to keep the Gazan civilians, so-called civilians, because there's not a lot of people who I would designate civilians, but that's a whole different story. But it's trying to get the civilians out of harm's way so we can go into Gaza City and do what needs to be done. This directly stands in counter to the charge of genocide, that the IDF is deliberately trying to separate the civilians from their homes, that they want to take over the homes. No, we are trying to separate the civilians from the Gazan fighters. Hamas, on the other hand, forces his civilians to stay and remain as human shields. They fire from schools, they fire from mosques, they fire from buildings where they know that other people are in there. They come out from tunnels inside buildings where people are still there. And the IDF task is to secure Gaza City while minimizing the human fallout as near as possible. And again, Israel has done more in this war to protect civilian lives. And I'm not going to say innocent, because very few people, I believe, are innocent in Gaza. But civilian lives, okay, non-combatant lives, Israel has done more to save them than any other military in history. But it's nearly impossible because of the battlefield that the Hamas has decided that we are going to fight under. In the meantime, there are negotiations that are going on in order to release or reach some kind of a negotiation with the Hamas. Now, when I say the negotiations are going on, that's not really true. The world is trying to press Israel and the Hamas into some kind of negotiated deal, some kind of ceasefire or hostage release. So as the Israeli military advances, Hamas, who is seeing the pressure, is feeling the pressure, has become more willing to talk. Every kilometer, every neighborhood, every building that Israel takes over in Gaza City translates into leverage, and I believe that this is something that Israel should have done a long, long time ago. I'm going to say this even more clearly. I believe Israel should have gone in full force almost from the beginning. Maybe after the first hostage negotiation, definitely we should have gone in and kind of just made sure that we get everything out. But you understand the sensitivity. But the talks are being mediated by Qatar, mediated by Egypt, mediated by Washington. And for some reason, lately, they've been putting more pressure on the Hamas than they have in the past. The central issues are this: the release of the hostages, and Israel will not stop this until all the hostages are released. On the other hand, Hamas knows that the minute that all the hostages are released, they have no cards to play, which is why I believe, I'm sorry to say, that Hamas will never be able to release all of the hostages. That's part of the dilemma that Israel is going in, to negotiate without leaving Hamas alive. And again, the whole dynamic is what is going to happen at the end of this. The world is saying, we'll finish the war even if Hamas stays in power. Israel is saying, we are not willing in any way, shape, or form for Hamas to stay in power. Hamas staying in power means that a year down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, we will be dealing with the same thing again. What we understood on the 7th of October is that Hamas, as an organization that, by the way, was democratically elected in 2007, if I remember correctly, by the Palestinians, and they said they want the Hamas to represent them because they believe that the Hamas can destroy Israel. Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution. Hamas wants a no Jewish state solution. That's the basic idea. And they keep on saying that, and they're willing to sacrifice their future. They're willing to sacrifice their economy. They're willing to sacrifice their children. Otherwise, here's something that doesn't make sense to me. 300 miles of tunnels under Gaza City. 300 miles. There's enough room in all of those tunnels. Listen to this. There's enough room in these tunnels for all the people of Gaza to go inside. All the people of Gaza, all the 2 million population in the different populations of Gaza can fit inside the tunnels. It's a bomb shelter. It was built as a bomb shelter. And Hamas does not allow its own civilian into the tunnels. There's two reasons. Because it wants the tunnels only to be used for military service reasons and not for defense. And two, they want their own people to die. Otherwise, why not put the people of Hamas in the tunnels? And it, again, it seems very clear to me. It seems very clear to Israelis. I don't understand why it's not clear to other people. In the meantime, international pressure. The U.S. has put huge amounts of pressure on Qatar and Egypt to keep Hamas at the negotiation table. Hamas doesn't really want to negotiate, doesn't want to finish this, especially if it means that they will be done. The Trump administration wants an agreement, but also wants Israel to limit and not to make the PR issue too bad. American military aid and American diplomatic cover in the UN are I'm going to say, an asset to Israel in this war. And we'll talk about that in a moment. In the meantime, listen, this has been our history. We've been dependent on allies. We've been dependent on the United States. In the past, we were dependent on the UK, on the British. I mean, again, we need these allies, but ultimately, our security, our people, our blood is our own. And I think people need to connect that to what's going on. Terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, starvation are being pushed on Israel all the time. And what I'm finding more and more scary is the fact that these terms are becoming normal, are becoming accepted, are even becoming accepted among Israel's allies. And here's the thing. I've been asked to explain or to convince people that Israel is not conducting a genocide in Gaza. It's like coming up to a person, coming up to a husband and say, prove to me that you're not beating your wife. I mean, why should I beat my wife? Why should I do this? It doesn't make sense. I love my wife. Why should we commit genocide? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help us. It doesn't do anything for us. And not only that, the amount of people in Gaza has risen, meaning more people have been born in Gaza during this war than have died. And we're being held to the standard and made to explain that we're not committing genocide when anybody with any kind of intelligence realizes that you don't have a genocide where the amount of population rises and doesn't decrease. It doesn't make sense. No modern army has faced this degree of double standards. I mean, Hamas has built these tunnels. It's supposed to be a bomb shelter. They're not used, yet Israel is blamed for the civilian deaths that Hamas could have put inside the bomb shelter. And I don't even believe the Hamas numbers. But even if you do take the Hamas numbers, at least half of them are Hamas fighters. They're not saying anything about that. Hamas fighters actually start at the age of 15. That's when they're sending them up with RPGs to fight against the tanks. Okay, this is a part of a bigger, wider war. We're being accused of starvation, so they bring pictures. And when we show that the pictures are not basically starvation because you can see nice people living in Hamas. I mean, there's a video of restaurants in Hamas, and there's literally chubby people walking around. So the pictures of starving babies in Hamas turn out to be children with cystic fibrosis and other problems. On the other hand, you can see that the hostages that are being held in the tunnels are actually being starved. You see the picture of them before and the picture of the tunnel. You can see, and the ones who have come out, we know that they've been living on half a pita a day. I mean, the slander, the lie, and the acceptance of people, some people that I respect, that they're willing to accept the lie, are willing to say, wait a minute, explain to me that it's not. Explain to me that you don't kill babies. Explain to me that you don't, 1, 2, 3. Explain to me that you are not what they're saying about you. Everybody's saying about it. There has to be some truth. No, there doesn't have to be truth. The majority is not always right, and especially in this era, this time of social media, the numbers, the likes do not make truth. This is part of a wider anti-Semitic campaign against Israel that literally echoes the blood libels of the Middle Ages. These are old lies that are dressed up in new language. And again, you, the ones who watch me here, understand what this actually is going on. Which brings me to another, I can't really believe how this works. The world is going to recognize a Palestinian state in September. And when the UN reconvenes, okay, Canada, the UK, France, Australia are preparing to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN. Where? What's the capital? What kind of government will they have? Where is this Palestinian state going to be? What is going to be the mechanism? What is their currency? I mean, the Palestinian state is not ready to be a state. There's nothing that is. There is a Palestinian Authority that is already in control of parts of Judea and Samaria, what we call the West Bank. And there was a Palestinian government called Hamas in control of Gaza on the 6th of October. What are we talking about? And add on to that, to the fact that the Hamas has said very clearly, they do not want a two-state solution. Because a two-state solution, even if it does give the Palestinian a state, will mean that they have to recognize the existence of a Jewish state, and Hamas is not willing to do that, even at the cost of them completely losing everything. So a two-state or a Palestinian state is not practical, but it's symbolic. And it means that these governments have gotten so frustrated that they're willing to give a prize to the Palestinians. They're willing to give a prize to reward the terrorists in order to press Israel into doing something that they think they know better than us needs to be done. And what it does more than anything is delegitimize Israel and reward the Hamas terrorism. It bypasses negotiation because while Hamas is believing that it's getting rewarded for this, they're not going to reach an agreement. They're not going to sit down and reach an agreement. They're not going to hand over the hostages. They're not going to agree to a ceasefire because the world is rewarding them for surviving. And this is something that we've seen in the past. We know about it, and let's tie in. Let's go to the Bible. Because the only way that this makes sense, the only way that starvation in Gaza has become a big issue, even though there's more people starving in Yemen and Sudan, the only way that the war in Gaza has become so critical, even though more people have died in the civil war in southern Sudan, or the civil war in Syria for that matter. Okay, the way the division of the land has become such a critical issue for these people, even though Turkey stole half of Cyprus, which was another separate nation, okay, and nobody's talking about that. The only way that this becomes an issue is if there is a predetermined need for the world to come against Israel. And when I need you to understand that the reason for this, now it comes out in political, it comes out in militarily, it comes out in geopolitical, but it is actually basically a biblical spiritual issue. And this is where it gets important, because God has said in the book of Joel, chapter 3, it warns that God's judgment on the nations is going to be horrific because they divided his land. And practically it means Israel may face even greater diplomatic isolation, diplomatic pressure, hatred all over the world, okay? And the question is, what is the rest of the world going to do? I got to add one more thing, and I've been really enjoying this. The United States of America, with this administration, this president, and I have to say a good friend of mine who is the ambassador, he is American ambassador in Israel, has done an amazing job of putting Israel in the right light. And President Trump has been supporting Israel. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, has been defending Israel on every platform possible. So check Mike Huckabee out. He's got a web page. He is the American ambassador to Israel, doing an amazing job. He's very articulate, far more articulate than me. Maybe I'll start sharing some of his content here and put this all in some connection. In the meantime, Israel is fighting all of these fronts. A military war to dismantle the Hamas and conquer Gaza City and get our hostages out. A diplomatic war to withstand the world's pressure on us and the UN's pressure on us and the delegitimizing of Israel. A diplomatic war to withstand the world pressure and the United Nations pressure to recognize a Palestinian state and delegitimize Israel. So that's another war. A spiritual war to stand against the ancient lies that have been perpetrated about Israel down through the ages. For Christians, the call is clear. Pray for Israel's strength. Pray for its truth to break through. Pray for the deception to be uncovered. And Israel's survival is not only a political issue, and it's not even a question, it's a biblical issue, and it is assured. Now the question is, what will happen until then? In the meantime, I want to talk about a Hebrew Israeli term that I think connects to this, because when we talk about Israel today, one of the words that echoes, at least from the Bible to this present issue, is the word Tzedek, or what you would call in English tzedakah, or justice. In the Bible, God commands in Deuteronomy, justice you will pursue, or in Hebrew, tzedek tirdof. It literally means to chase justice, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord has given you. Notice that Deuteronomy says twice justice, tzedek, okay, twice justice. And that is to stress that we never forget that our connection to the land is based on righteousness, fairness, and justice, which is why Satan has done such a major job in turning this on our heads. The prophets pick up on the same theme. Amos says, "Let justice roll like the waters and righteousness like a mighty streams." It is part of our covenant identity. It's part of our core identity. It's part of the connection that we have with God himself. But here's the tragedy. The war has cried or turned the word justice and twisted it completely. And the United Nations, in protests across the Western cities, people accuse Israel of genocide, ethnic cleansing, starvation. They are pursuing justice. That's why they're doing this. They're saying, we're pursuing justice for the perpetrator. This is not justice. This is counterfeit. This is injustice dressed up in the language of morality. Because what is true justice? In the scriptures, justice is always about, listen to this, truth, fairness, protecting the innocent. Israel warns the civilians in Gaza. It opens up humanitarian corridors. Even while fighting in the most difficult urban battlefield the world has ever seen, we're still actually trying to show fairness to our enemy. The Hamas, on the other hand, hides behind women and children, spends billions and billions on terror tunnels instead of food and shelters, and then dares to shout injustice when Israel defends itself. The New Testament builds on this same biblical idea. Jesus himself said in Matthew, "Woe to you, teachers of the Pharisees! You are hypocrites. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law of justice, mercy, and fairness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former." And again, this is critical to what Israel actually is. So that was the Hebrew term for today. It is tzedek or tzedakah. Another word that connects to tzedakah is when tzedakah becomes an object or support, and the Hebrew word for supporting a cause is also giving justice or giving tzedakah. Which brings me to Gihon Springs, which is the ministry that we are actually working with. Gihon Springs is actually supporting, giving tzedakah to the people of Israel, to the military in Israel. By the way, we actually just now paid for a house renovation for one of the widows of one of the soldiers that fell in Israel. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to bring her story sometime soon. So we at Gihon Springs are literally on the ground giving justice or tzedakah to the people in Israel, to ministries in Israel, and different aspects in Israel that need this justice from us here. So if you want to be a part of this, if you want to connect to this, here's a QR code. Click this QR code or connect to this and be a part of this. That is GihonSprings.com if you want to do that. And just remember what's going on in Israel. Pray for us. Pray that justice will be shown. Justice will come out. Pray for me and Christy, by the way. We're in grandma and grandpa mode. In the meantime, we're speaking in conferences in different places. So if you want to connect to that, this is David Tal. This is the Balagan Connection. Hope to see you soon.